The Arizona sun was absolutely brutal that afternoon in July 1987. David Coleman wiped the sweat from his forehead for what felt like the 100th time as he stared at his broken-down truck on the side of the lonely highway. The engine had just died without warning. And now here he was, miles away from anywhere that resembled civilization. David was 28 years old and worked as a geologist. His job took him to remote places all across the Southwest, studying rocks and minerals for mining companies. He was used to being alone in the middle of nowhere, but this was different. This time his truck had betrayed him, and his radio wasn't picking up any signals. He looked down the empty road in both directions. Nothing but desert, scattered bushes, and heat waves dancing on the asphalt. The nearest town was at least 15 miles back, and he hadn't seen another car pass by in over an hour. David was starting to wonder if he'd have to walk when something caught his eye in the distance. An elderly woman was walking along the side of the road, carrying what looked like several heavy grocery bags. She moved slowly, stopping every few steps to rest. Even from far away, David could tell she was struggling. Without thinking twice, David grabbed his water bottle and started jogging toward her. As he got closer, he could see she was probably in her 70s, with long gray hair tied back and deeply tanned skin. She wore a simple cotton dress and worn sneakers. Her face was lined with years of hard work and sun exposure. "Excuse me, ma'am," David called out, slowing to a walk as he approached. "Do you need some help with those bags?" The woman looked up at him with suspicious eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just studied his face like she was trying to figure out if he was trustworthy. David couldn't blame her. A strange man offering help on a deserted road could mean trouble. "My truck broke down back there," David explained, pointing behind him. "I'm not going anywhere fast, and those bags look really heavy. I'd be happy to help you carry them wherever you're going." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am. I'm from Colorado originally. I'm working in the area, studying rock formations and mineral deposits." David smiled. "Name's David Coleman." "Elena," the woman said simply. She looked at her bags, then back at David, then at his broken truck in the distance. After a long moment, she nodded. "All right. My home is about 2 miles up this road. If you're offering, I won't say no." David took the heaviest bags from her hands. They were packed with canned goods, flour, and other supplies. He could feel the weight pulling at his arms immediately. "How are you planning to carry all this by yourself?" he asked, genuinely concerned. Elena shrugged. "Same way I always do. One step at a time, with plenty of breaks. The store in town doesn't deliver out here to the reservation." As they walked, David learned that Elena belonged to the Apache tribe and lived on reservation land. Her husband had died 5 years ago, and since then she'd been managing on her own. Her nephew helped when he could, but he had his own family to take care of. "You must be pretty strong to make this walk regularly," David said, adjusting the bags in his arms. "Strong or stubborn?" Elena replied with a slight smile. "Probably both." The 2 miles felt longer in the heat, but Elena kept up a steady pace. She started telling David about the land around them, pointing out plants and rock formations with names he'd never heard before. She talked about how this desert had been her people's home for generations, long before any highways or towns existed. David found himself genuinely interested. Most people he met in his work were either other scientists or locals who saw him as just another outsider coming to take something from their land. But Elena spoke differently. She wasn't hostile, just matter of fact. This was her home, and she was sharing its stories. "That mesa over there," Elena pointed to a flat-topped mountain in the distance. "My grandfather used to take me there when I was a little girl. He taught me which plants could heal and which could harm. He taught me to read the sky and know when rain was coming." "That's incredible knowledge," David said. "I study rocks for a living, but I don't know half of what you probably know about this land." Elena glanced at him with what might have been approval. "Book learning is one thing, land learning is another. Both have their place." When they finally reached Elena's home, David was surprised by its simplicity. It was a small house with a covered porch, surrounded by a dusty yard with a few struggling plants, but despite its modest appearance, the place felt like home. There was care in the way things were arranged. a sense of pride in the swept porch and clean windows. "Come inside," Elena insisted. "You need water and rest before you try to fix that truck." David wanted to protest, but the truth was he was exhausted and desperately thirsty. Elena's home was cooler inside, shaded from the brutal sun. She poured him a large glass of cold water from her refrigerator, and David drank it gratefully. "Thank you," he said. "I really appreciate your kindness." "You helped an old woman carry her groceries 2 miles in this heat," Elena replied. "Kindness deserves kindness." She insisted he sit down while she prepared some food. David tried to refuse, but Elena was firm. "You'll need your strength. My nephew should be here in an hour or so. He can help with your truck." While Elena moved around her small kitchen, David looked at the photos on her walls. There were old black and white pictures of people in traditional dress, more recent color photos of what looked like family gatherings, and several pictures of a young woman at different ages. "That's my daughter Lisa," Elena said, noticing where he was looking. "She's a teacher in Phoenix, works with kids from the reservation who go to city schools." "She looks like she has your smile," David observed. Elena's face brightened with obvious pride. "She's a good girl, smart, hardworking, takes after her father that way." There was sadness in her voice when she mentioned her late husband. They ate together in comfortable silence, and then Elena told more stories about her life, her people's history, and the changes she'd seen over the decades. David listened, fascinated. This was the kind of knowledge you couldn't find in any geology textbook or university course. When Elena's nephew finally arrived with tools, David felt almost reluctant to leave. The young man, Robert, was friendly enough and helped David diagnose the truck problem. It was the alternator, something they could fix temporarily with the right parts. As David prepared to leave, he turned to Elena. "Thank you for everything today. The water, the food, the stories. You didn't have to be so kind to a stranger." Elena looked at him with those wise, weathered eyes. "You stopped to help when you didn't have to. That says something about a person." She paused. "You're welcome to visit again, David Coleman. The road gets lonely sometimes." David found himself saying, "I'd like that. I really would." He meant it too. As he drove away in his temporarily fixed truck, David couldn't stop thinking about the unexpected afternoon. He'd come to Arizona to study rocks and minerals, but today he'd learned something far more valuable about kindness, culture, and human connection. What David didn't know was that this chance encounter would change his entire life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. 3 months had passed since that sweltering July afternoon when David's truck broke down. He'd thought about Elena many times during those months, wondering how she was managing, whether she was still making those long walks from town with her heavy grocery bags. The truth was, David's work had taken him to different sites across Arizona and New Mexico during that time. But now he was back in the area, assigned to a 6-month project studying copper deposits in the region. And he couldn't shake the feeling that he should check on Elena. It was October now, and the desert had cooled considerably. David drove down that same highway, this time with his truck running perfectly and the back seat loaded with supplies. He'd bought practical things at the store in town: canned goods, flour, coffee, and some fresh vegetables. He told himself he was just being neighborly, but deep down he knew it was more than that. He genuinely missed talking to Elena. When he pulled up to her house, Elena was sitting on her porch working on some kind of handcraft. She looked up at the sound of his truck, and for a moment, her face showed complete surprise. Then slowly a smile spread across her weathered features. "David Coleman," she said, standing up. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "I promised I'd visit," David said, getting out of his truck. "I'm not much good at keeping promises if I don't follow through." He started unloading the supplies, and Elena's eyes widened. "You didn't have to do this," she protested, but David could hear the emotion in her voice. "I wanted to," he said simply. "Besides, I'm going to be working in the area for the next 6 months. I figured we could be friends if you don't mind having a geologist stopping by now and then." Elena invited him inside, and this time David felt more comfortable. They talked for hours that afternoon. Elena wanted to know about his work, and David explained how he used different tools to study rocks and figure out what minerals might be buried underground. He tried to keep it simple, but Elena asked smart questions that showed she understood more than he expected. "So you're like a detective," Elena said, "but instead of solving crimes, you're solving mysteries about the Earth." "That's actually a perfect way to put it," David laughed. "I never thought of it like that." Elena, in turn, told him more about Apache traditions and beliefs. She explained how her people viewed the land not as something to own, but as something to care for and live with. She talked about ceremonies and stories that had been passed down for generations. "When my husband was alive," Elena said softly, "he used to say that the land remembers everything, every footstep, every prayer, every tear. He said that's why we have to treat it with respect." David felt something shift in his perspective. His whole career had been about what could be taken from the earth, what resources could be extracted. But Elena was talking about relationship, about responsibility. Over the following weeks, David found himself visiting Elena regularly. Sometimes he'd bring supplies, other times just his company. They fell into an easy routine. Elena would make coffee, and they'd sit on her porch or at her small kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Elena told stories about her childhood, about the old ways that were slowly disappearing. She talked about her late husband Thomas and how they'd built their life together despite poverty and prejudice. She spoke about her daughter Lisa with obvious pride, though David noticed a hint of worry in her voice too. "Lisa is so focused on her work," Elena said one afternoon. "She helps so many children make such a difference in their lives, but she forgets to make a life for herself." "What do you mean?" David asked, sipping his coffee. "She's 26 years old and she comes home alone every time. No husband, no boyfriend, not even someone she's interested in." Elena shook her head. "I worry she'll end up by herself like me." "You're not alone," David pointed out. "You have family, friends, people who care about you." "It's not the same as having a partner," Elena said. "Someone who chooses to be with you every day. Someone to share the good times and the hard times." David understood what she meant. He'd been so focused on his career that he'd never really made room for that kind of relationship either. He'd had girlfriends here and there, but nothing serious. His work took him to remote places for months at a time. It wasn't fair to ask someone to wait around for him. As autumn deepened, David found that Elena had become more than just a friend. She reminded him of his own mother, who'd passed away from cancer when he was 23. Elena had that same warmth, that same way of listening that made you feel heard and valued. She gave advice without being pushy, and she called him out when he was being stubborn or foolish. One afternoon, David arrived to find Elena struggling to fix a broken step on her porch. He immediately took over the repairs, and Elena watched him work with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're a good man, David," she said after a while. "Your mother raised you right." David looked up from his work, surprised by the sudden compliment. "Thank you. That means a lot." "I've been thinking," Elena continued, settling into her porch chair. "Lisa is coming home for Thanksgiving. It's her favorite holiday. She always takes a whole week off from work to be here." "That sounds nice," David said, focusing back on the step. "You should join us," Elena said. "Have Thanksgiving dinner with us." David paused in his work. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to intrude on family time." "You're not intruding." "I'm inviting you." Elena's tone was firm. "Besides, you'll be alone otherwise, won't you?" "No sense in that when there's plenty of food and good company here." David felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I'd like that very much." Elena nodded with satisfaction. "Good. That's settled then." What David didn't realize was that Elena had been planning this for weeks. She'd seen something in David from that very first day when he'd helped her with her groceries. She'd seen kindness, respect, and a good heart. And in the months since, as she'd gotten to know him better, she'd become convinced of something. David Coleman would be perfect for her daughter. Elena wasn't the type to force things or push people together, obviously, but she was a mother, and mothers have ways of helping fate along. She'd already told Lisa about David in their phone conversations. Nothing too direct, just casual mentions. "That geologist I told you about stopped by again. Such a polite young man. He fixed my porch step. Or David brought groceries today. He's very thoughtful for someone so young." Lisa had been curious, Elena could tell. Her daughter asked questions about David, what he was like, what they talked about. Elena answered truthfully but carefully, planting seeds without making it obvious. As Thanksgiving approached, Elena felt a quiet excitement. She was doing what mothers do, looking out for her daughter's happiness. But she was also looking out for David, this young man who'd become like a son to her. They were both good people who deserved companionship and love. Whether they'd see that in each other, well, that was up to them. But Elena was determined to at least give them the chance to meet. The last time David visited before Thanksgiving, Elena was making a list of what she needed from the store for the big meal. "Do you like turkey?" she asked casually. "Love it," David replied. "My mom used to make this amazing stuffing with sage and onions." "You'll have to tell me about it," Elena said. "Maybe I can try making it that way." As David left that evening, Elena stood on her porch and watched his truck disappear down the road. She said a quiet prayer, something her grandmother had taught her long ago. A prayer for good things to come, for hearts to be open, for love to find its way. The universe had brought David to her that day on the highway. She was sure of it. And if she was right about what she sensed, the universe wasn't done with him yet, or with her daughter. Thanksgiving was going to be very interesting indeed. The days leading up to Thanksgiving kept Elena busy with preparations, but her mind was always working on her quiet plan. She'd been thinking about this carefully, knowing that the wrong approach could backfire completely. Young people these days were suspicious of matchmaking, and with good reason. Too many parents pushed too hard and ended up driving their children away. No, Elena had to be subtle, natural. She had to create an opportunity and then let things unfold on their own. During one of her weekly phone calls with Lisa, Elena mentioned David again, but this time with a bit more detail. "You remember that geologist I told you about? David?" Elena said, keeping her tone casual as she folded laundry. "The one who helped you with your groceries?" Lisa's voice crackled through the phone line. "Yes, that one. He's been visiting regularly. Brings supplies sometimes, helps with repairs around the house." Elena paused. "He reminds me of your father in some ways." There was silence on the other end. Elena knew that comparison would catch Lisa's attention. Her daughter had loved her father deeply, and any comparison to him was significant. "How so?" Lisa finally asked. "He's patient, kind, really listens when people talk, and he's curious about our culture, asks respectful questions." Elena sat down with her laundry basket. "He lost his mother a few years ago. I think he misses having that connection." "That's sad," Lisa said, and Elena could hear genuine sympathy in her daughter's voice. "I invited him to join us for Thanksgiving," Elena said, as if it had just occurred to her. "He'll be alone otherwise, and there's no reason for that. You don't mind, do you?" Another pause. "No, of course not. If he's been good to you, Mom, then he's welcome." "Good," Elena said with satisfaction. "I think you'll like him." After they hung up, Elena smiled to herself. The pieces were falling into place. The next time David visited, Elena was more direct with him. They were sitting on her porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "Tell me about your life, David," Elena said. "Do you have someone special waiting for you back in Colorado?" David looked surprised by the question. "No, ma'am. No girlfriend or anything like that." "Why not? A good-looking young man like you, with a decent job and a kind heart?" Elena raised an eyebrow. David laughed, a bit embarrassed. "I move around too much for work. It's hard to build a relationship when you're never in one place for long. Doesn't seem fair to ask someone to wait around while I'm off looking at rocks in the middle of nowhere." "That's thoughtful of you," Elena said. "But lonely too, I imagine." "Sometimes," David admitted. "But it's the job I chose. Can't complain about the consequences." Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, "My Lisa is the same way, so devoted to her work that she doesn't make time for herself. I worry about her." "She sounds dedicated," David offered. "She is. Too dedicated sometimes." Elena turned to look at David directly. "She helps children from the reservation who are struggling in city schools. Tutors them, advocates for them, makes sure they don't forget where they come from. It's important work." "It sounds like it," David said sincerely. "But important work doesn't keep you warm at night," Elena continued. "Doesn't give you someone to laugh with or share your troubles with." She's 26 and never even talks about dating. "Just work, work, work," David nodded, understanding the concern. "It's hard to balance everything." "Will you do me a favor?" Elena asked suddenly. "Of course. When you meet Lisa at Thanksgiving, will you talk to her? Not like I'm asking you to, just naturally. She needs friends who understand what it's like to care deeply about their work. Maybe she needs to see that it's possible to have both a career and a personal life." David agreed, not seeing anything unusual about the request. He thought Elena was just worried about her daughter being lonely, the way any parent would be. What David didn't realize was how carefully Elena was orchestrating this. She wasn't lying or manipulating exactly. She was simply helping two good people find their way to each other, removing obstacles, creating opportunities. In her phone calls with Lisa over the next 2 weeks, Elena would casually mention things about David, how he'd fixed the loose board on her back steps, how he'd noticed that her truck needed new tires and had helped her find affordable ones, how he actually listened to her stories about the old days instead of just pretending to care. And when talking to David, Elena would mention Lisa, how her daughter worked so hard for kids who needed advocates, how Lisa still knew all the traditional stories despite living in the city, how she came home every chance she got because family mattered to her. Elena never said anything false. She simply highlighted the qualities in each person that she knew the other would appreciate. She was painting a picture, letting each of them form an image of the other before they even met. A week before Thanksgiving, Lisa called with a question that made Elena's heart sing. "So, Mom, tell me more about this David. What's he really like?" Elena heard the curiosity in her daughter's voice, maybe even a hint of nervousness. "Good. Why don't you judge for yourself when you meet him?" Elena said, keeping her voice neutral. "I don't want to influence your opinion." "You've already been telling me about him for months," Lisa pointed out with a laugh. "Have I?" "I guess I have. He's just been around so much that he feels like family now." Elena paused deliberately. "But really, you should form your own opinion. I'm just an old woman. What do I know about young people these days?" Lisa laughed again. "You know more than you let on, Mom." Oh, if only her daughter knew how true that was. The day before Thanksgiving, David showed up with his truck full of supplies. He'd bought way too much food, and Elena scolded him even as her eyes grew misty. "You didn't need to do all this," she said. "I wanted to contribute to the meal," David insisted. "You're opening your home to me. It's the least I can do." As they unloaded everything, Elena watched David carefully. He was nervous, she could tell. He kept asking questions about what he should wear, what time he should arrive, whether he should bring anything else. "David," Elena finally said, putting her hand on his arm, "just be yourself. That's all anyone needs to be." "I don't want to make a bad impression," David admitted. "You've been so kind to me." "I want your daughter to think well of me, too," Elena smiled. "She will. I'm sure of it." That night, lying in bed, Elena thought about her late husband, Thomas. She wondered what he would think of her matchmaking efforts. He'd probably laugh and tell her she was being a meddling old woman, but he'd also understand. They'd had 40 good years together before the cancer took him. She wanted that kind of partnership for Lisa, and she sensed that David wanted it too, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, Elena woke early to start preparations. The turkey needed time to cook, and there were pies to make, vegetables to prepare, and the table to set. Around noon, she heard a car pull up. Lisa had arrived. Elena went to the door, her heart beating faster than usual. Her daughter looked beautiful, as always, wearing jeans and a warm sweater. Her long black hair loose around her shoulders. They hugged tight, and Elena breathed in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo. "I've missed you," Elena said. "Missed you too, Mom," Lisa replied, then pulling back with a teasing smile. "So when do I meet this famous David?" "He'll be here at 3, Elena said. "Now come help me with these pies and tell me everything about what's been happening in Phoenix." As they worked together in the kitchen, Elena felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She'd set everything up as best she could. Now it was up to David and Lisa to discover what she already suspected. Sometimes the best gift a mother can give is simply an opportunity. The rest has to come from the heart. David must have changed his shirt 3 times before leaving his motel room that Thanksgiving afternoon. He finally settled on a simple blue button-down and clean jeans. Nothing too fancy, but respectful enough for a holiday meal. His hands were actually shaking a little as he drove toward Elena's house, which was ridiculous. He was just having dinner with a friend and meeting her daughter. Why was he so nervous? When he pulled up at exactly 3 o'clock, he sat in his truck for a moment, taking a deep breath. Through the window, he could see movement inside the house. The smell of roasting turkey drifted through the air, making his stomach rumble. Before he could talk himself out of it, David grabbed the flowers he'd bought and the pie from the passenger seat and walked to the front door. He knocked and Elena answered almost immediately, wearing an apron and a warm smile. "Right on time," she said, ushering him inside. Come in, come in." The house smelled amazing, like every Thanksgiving David remembered from his childhood. And there, standing by the kitchen counter, was Lisa. David's first thought was that Elena's photos hadn't done her justice. Lisa was beautiful, but not in the flashy way you see in magazines. She had her mother's high cheekbones and strong features, dark eyes that seemed to take everything in, and long black hair that caught the light from the kitchen window. She was tall and moved with easy confidence as she turned from whatever she'd been stirring on the stove. "Lisa, this is David Coleman," Elena said. "David, my daughter Lisa." "Nice to meet you," David said, suddenly very aware that he was holding flowers and a pie awkwardly in his hands. I brought these." Lisa's expression was polite but guarded. "Nice to meet you too. Thanks for the flowers, they're lovely." She took them from him and David noticed she didn't quite meet his eyes. He handed the pie to Elena, who made approving noises about it being her favorite kind, apple with cinnamon. The first hour was painfully awkward. Lisa clearly knew what her mother was up to and she wasn't having it. David could tell from the way she kept herself busy with cooking tasks, how she answered his attempts at conversation with short, polite responses. She thought he was just another guy her mother was trying to set her up with, and she'd obviously been through this before. David felt like an idiot. Here he'd been, getting nervous about making a good impression, and Lisa couldn't have been less interested. He tried to help in the kitchen but mostly just stayed out of the way, talking with Elena about his work and the project he was currently on. Finally, Elena announced that dinner was ready and they all sat down at the small dining table. Elena had outdone herself. The turkey was golden brown. There were mashed potatoes, stuffing, green beans, cranberry sauce, and fresh rolls. It looked like a magazine spread. "Mom, you didn't have to make so much," Lisa said, but her voice was warm. Whatever walls she had up for David, they came down for her mother. "It's Thanksgiving," Elena said simply. "Now let's say a blessing." They held hands around the table and Elena spoke a prayer in Apache, then translated it into English. She thanked the Creator for the food, for family and friends, for the land and all it provided. She thanked the turkey for giving its life to nourish them. It was beautiful and humbling, and David felt honored to be included. As they started eating, Elena asked Lisa about her work in Phoenix. Lisa's entire demeanor changed when she talked about the kids she worked with. Her face lit up, her voice became animated, and David found himself genuinely interested. "There's this one boy, Tommy," Lisa was saying. "He's 10 years old, came from the reservation to live with his aunt in Phoenix. The school wanted to put him in special education classes because he wasn't keeping up, but it wasn't that he couldn't learn. He just learned differently, and nobody was taking the time to understand that." "What did you do?" David asked before he could stop himself. Lisa really looked at him for the first time. "I worked with him after school 3 times a week. Turns out he's actually gifted in math, but he needed to visualize problems differently than how they were teaching in class. Once we figured that out, he went from failing to the top of his class in 2 months. That's incredible," David said, meaning it. "You probably changed the whole trajectory of his life." "That's what I tell her," Elena said proudly. "But she never thinks she does enough. Because there are so many more kids like Tommy," Lisa said. "Kids who just need someone to believe in them and figure out how they learn best. The system fails them, and then people wonder why kids from the reservation struggle in city schools." David found himself drawn into the conversation naturally. He started talking about his own work, but not in a boring technical way. He talked about how different communities viewed the land, how mining companies would come in and see only resources while the people who lived there saw home, history, and identity. "That must put you in a difficult position sometimes," Lisa observed, and David noticed her walls were coming down a little. "It does," David admitted. "I'm hired to find minerals and resources, but I've learned that every place I study has stories and significance. I try to do my work with respect, but I'm not sure that's always enough." "At least you think about it," Lisa said. "Most people in your position wouldn't even care." They talked about environmental issues, about the struggle to preserve culture while adapting to modern life, about education and opportunity. David discovered that Lisa was not just passionate but brilliant. She had degrees in education and social work, spoke 3 languages including Apache, and had plans to eventually open a cultural center that would help Native kids succeed in school while staying connected to their heritage. "That's an amazing vision," David said. "Have you started working on making it happen?" "It's still in the dream phase," Lisa said, but David could see the fire in her eyes when she talked about it. "I need funding, community support, space. It's a lot." "Big dreams usually are," David said, "but that doesn't mean they're impossible." Elena watched them talk, staying quiet for the most part, just eating her dinner with a small, satisfied smile. She'd seen the shift happen right before her eyes. Lisa had gone from closed off and skeptical to engaged and animated. And David, who'd been so nervous earlier, was now relaxed and genuinely connecting with her daughter. After dinner, they all helped clean up, and then Elena suggested they take a walk before dessert. "Let your dinner settle," she said. "David, why don't you show Lisa that interesting rock formation you told me about? The one just past the ridge?" It was so obviously a setup that both David and Lisa looked at each other and actually laughed. "Mom, you're not subtle," Lisa said, shaking her head but smiling. "I don't know what you mean," Elena said innocently. "I just thought Lisa might like to see it before it gets dark. She used to love walking out there when she was a girl." "It's okay," David said to Lisa. "We don't have to if you don't want to." Lisa studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Actually, I could use the walk. And I am curious about this rock formation. My mom's been talking about your work for months." They grabbed jackets and headed out into the cool November evening. The sun was starting to set, painting everything in gold and amber light. For the first few minutes, they walked in silence. Then Lisa spoke up. "I'm sorry if I was cold earlier," she said. "My mom means well, but she's been trying to set me up with people for years. It gets old." "I get it," David said. "For what it's worth, I didn't know that's what she was doing. I just thought she wanted me to meet her daughter." "Really?" Lisa looked skeptical. "Really. Elena's been like family to me these past few months. She reminds me of my own mom." David kicked at a small stone on the path. "I lost my mother 5 years ago, and I didn't realize how much I missed having that until I met Elena." Lisa's expression softened completely. "I'm sorry about your mom. Thanks. She would have liked Elena, I think. They had that same way of seeing right through you but loving you anyway." They walked further and the conversation flowed more easily. Lisa pointed out plants and talked about their traditional uses. David showed her the rock formation, explaining the geological forces that had created it millions of years ago. "It's weird," Lisa said, running her hand over the layered stone. "You look at this and see time, pressure, minerals. I look at it and see stories my grandfather told me about these rocks being the bones of ancient giants." "Both things can be true," David said. "The science doesn't erase the stories. If anything, it adds another layer to them." Lisa smiled at that, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You know what? You're not what I expected." "Is that good or bad?" David asked. "Good," Lisa said. "Definitely good." When they got back to the house, Elena was putting out dessert, that same small smile on her face. The rest of the evening passed in easy conversation, laughter, and the sharing of stories. When David finally left around 8 o'clock, Lisa walked him to his truck. "Thanks for coming today," she said. "And sorry again about being rude at first." "Don't worry about it," David said. "I had a great time." "Your mom was right, you're pretty amazing," Lisa laughed. "She said the same thing about you. Guess we both got played by a matchmaking mother." "Could be worse," David said with a grin. "Could be better too," Lisa said, and there was something in her voice that made David's heart skip. "I'm here until Monday. Maybe we could get coffee or something." The coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour conversation at a small diner in town, then a walk through the desert, then dinner the next evening. By the time Lisa had to drive back to Phoenix on Monday morning, both she and David knew something significant had started. "I'll call you," David promised as Lisa loaded her car. "You better," Lisa said with a smile that made his chest feel tight. Elena watched from her porch, waving goodbye as Lisa drove away. When David turned back to her, she just raised an eyebrow and said nothing. She didn't need to. Over the following weeks and months, what had started as a spark began growing into something deeper. Lisa found reasons to come home more frequently than she ever had before. Weekend trips that had been rare became regular, and somehow David always seemed to be visiting Elena when Lisa arrived. They started taking walks together through the desert landscape, sometimes with Elena, and sometimes just the two of them. The Arizona winter was mild, perfect for long hikes and conversations that stretched for hours. Lisa taught David things he'd never learned in any classroom. She showed him which plants could heal cuts and burns, which ones could be made into tea for stomach problems, which ones the deer preferred to eat. She explained how her ancestors had lived in harmony with this harsh environment, finding abundance where others saw only emptiness. See that cactus there? Lisa pointed to a tall saguaro. It can live for 200 years. It provides homes for birds, food for animals, and if you know how, you can get water from it. One plant, so many purposes. It's like every living thing here has a role in the whole system, David observed. Exactly. That's what a lot of people don't understand. They see desert and think it's dead or useless. But it's one of the most complex, interconnected ecosystems on Earth. Lisa's passion when she talked about these things was magnetic. David, in turn, shared his knowledge with Lisa. He showed her how to read the layers in exposed rock faces, how each stripe represented thousands or millions of years. He explained plate tectonics and how the mountains around them had been pushed up from ancient seas. So all of this was underwater once? Lisa asked, running her hand along a cliff face. Millions of years ago, yes. See these patterns? Those are fossils of sea creatures, shells mostly. David pointed to the faint impressions in the rock. That's incredible, Lisa breathed. My grandfather used to say the earth remembers everything. I always thought he meant spiritually, but maybe he meant literally too. Maybe he meant both, David suggested. Their relationship grew naturally, without pressure or rush. They were both cautious people who'd been hurt before or disappointed. But there was an ease between them that neither had experienced with anyone else. David found himself calling Lisa every evening when he got back to his motel after work. They'd talk about their days, share frustrations and victories, debate everything from politics to the best way to make fry bread. Sometimes they'd talk for 10 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. I have papers to grade, Lisa would say, laughing. I have core samples to catalog, David would counter, but neither wanted to hang up first. Elena watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. She saw how David's eyes lit up when Lisa's car pulled in. She noticed how Lisa had started keeping extra clothes at home, making it easier to visit more often. She observed the small intimacies growing between them. The way Lisa would brush dust off David's shoulder without thinking. How David would automatically make Lisa's coffee exactly the way she liked it. You're looking smug, Lisa told her mother one evening as they prepared dinner together while David was outside fixing a loose fence post. Am I? Elena asked innocently. You know you are. You're proud of your matchmaking. I didn't make anything happen, Elena said. I just introduced 2 good people. What happened after that was all you two. Lisa was quiet for a moment, chopping vegetables. He's different from anyone I've dated before. How so? He actually listens. And he's not intimidated by me having opinions or being passionate about things. He asks questions because he really wants to know, not because he's trying to impress me. Lisa paused, and he gets why my culture matters to me. He doesn't treat it like something exotic or try to act like he knows more than he does. Your father was like that, Elena said softly. Respectful, curious, humble enough to learn. I see why you like him, Mom. I really do. By March, Lisa and David had fallen into a routine. She'd drive down every other weekend, and David would arrange his fieldwork schedule to have those weekends free. They'd spend time with Elena, but also carved out time for themselves. Long drives to different sites, quiet dinners at small restaurants, evenings sitting on Elena's porch watching the stars come out. One Saturday, David took Lisa to a site where he was doing core drilling. He showed her the equipment, explained the process, let her look at the samples they'd pulled up. This core is from 800 feet down, David explained, showing her a cylinder of rock. See how it changes color here? That's where one geological period ended and another began. Millions of years of history in this one piece. Lisa held the rock carefully, studying it. Do you ever think about the responsibility of knowing where resources are, I mean? What happens after you find them? David had been asking himself the same question more and more lately. Yeah, I do. More than I used to. Honestly, meeting you and Elena has changed how I see my work. How? I used to think I was just doing science, finding minerals, mapping deposits, collecting data, but every site I study is someone's home, someone's sacred place, someone's history. David looked at the desert landscape around them. I can't just ignore that anymore. Lisa smiled at him, and it was filled with warmth. You're a good man, David Coleman. I'm trying to be, he said. They also faced difficult moments. Arguments about things that mattered. Lisa got frustrated when David talked about work that might lead to mining operations on or near tribal lands. David got defensive, feeling like she was judging his entire career. I'm not the bad guy here, David said during one heated discussion. I'm just doing my job. I know that. But doing your job has consequences for real people, for communities, for sacred sites. Lisa's voice was sharp. So what am I supposed to do? Quit? Lie in my reports? I'm not saying that. I'm saying you have to think about the impact of your work. They'd stared at each other, both frustrated, both hurt. Then Lisa had sighed. I'm sorry. I know you care. I know you're one of the good ones. This stuff matters so much to me. I know it does, and I'm trying to understand. I am. David ran his hand through his hair. Maybe we can figure out together how I can do my work with more awareness, more respect. I'd like that, Lisa had said. These moments, as difficult as they were, actually brought them closer. They were learning to fight fair, to disagree without attacking, to find common ground even in complicated issues. Elena watched them navigate these challenges with approval. Real relationships weren't just about the easy times. They were about working through the hard stuff too. One evening in early April, David and Lisa were sitting on Elena's porch while Elena was inside making tea. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of desert flowers. Can I ask you something? David said. Sure. Where do you see this going? Us, I mean. His heart was pounding. Lisa was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I know I'm happier when you're around. I know I think about you constantly when we're apart. I know that what we have feels different from anything I've had before. Different how? Real, Lisa said simply. It feels real and solid and like it could actually last. I feel the same way, David admitted. But there are complications. My work takes me all over. You're building something important in Phoenix. How do we make that work? I don't know, Lisa said honestly. But I want to try. Don't you? Yeah, David said, reaching for her hand. I really do. Inside the house, Elena smiled as she poured tea. She could hear their voices through the window, low and serious. Young love was never simple, but the best kind was worth fighting for. She thought about her own courtship with Thomas, how they'd faced obstacles too. Her family hadn't approved at first. There had been poverty, uncertainty, hard times, but they'd chosen each other anyway, every day, for 40 years. Elena carried the tea tray outside and found David and Lisa sitting close together. Lisa's head on David's shoulder, their fingers intertwined. Tea's ready, Elena announced. They both looked up, and Elena saw something in their faces that made her heart sing. They were falling in love. Really, truly in love. Thank you, Mom, Lisa said, accepting a cup. For the tea? Elena asked. For everything, Lisa said meaningfully. Elena just nodded and settled into her chair, looking out at the desert she'd called home her entire life. Sometimes, she thought, the best things in life come from the simplest acts of kindness. David had helped an old woman carry groceries, and look where it had led. The seeds she'd planted were growing strong roots now. Soon, she suspected, they'd bloom into something beautiful. By summer, David and Lisa's relationship had become serious enough that it couldn't be ignored or dismissed as just dating. They were building something real, which meant they had to face the real challenges that came with it. The first major test came in June when David was offered a 3-month assignment in Montana. Good pay, interesting work, a chance to advance his career. But it meant being away from Lisa, from Elena, from everything that had become important to him. He told Lisa about the offer over dinner at a restaurant in Phoenix. She'd driven up to see him there for once, and they were sitting on a patio under string lights. 3 months? Lisa's face fell. I know. It's a long time. David reached across the table for her hand. But the money is really good, and it could lead to better positions. I understand that, Lisa said, but her voice was tight. You have to do what's right for your career. Lisa, talk to me. What are you thinking? She was quiet for a moment, pushing food around her plate. I'm thinking that this is what I was afraid of. That we'd get close and then your work would take you away, and I'd be left here waiting, wondering when or if you're coming back. I'm coming back, David said firmly. This isn't me leaving you. It's just a temporary job. That's what they all say at first, Lisa said, and there was old pain in her voice. My mom's sister married a man who took temporary jobs all over the country. Eventually, he just stopped coming back. Left her with 3 kids and a lot of broken promises. David hadn't known that story. I'm not that man, Lisa. I wouldn't do that to you. I want to believe that. Lisa finally looked up at him and her eyes were wet. But I'm scared, David. I'm scared of falling even more in love with you and then losing you to your next job and the job after that. Then come with me, David said impulsively. What? Come to Montana with me. Take a leave from work. We'll make it an adventure. Lisa shook her head. I can't. I have commitments here. Kids depending on me. A program I'm building. I can't just leave for 3 months. And there it was, the fundamental problem they'd been dancing around. 2 careers, 2 lives, 2 sets of obligations that didn't easily mesh. They talked for hours that night trying to find solutions that satisfied both of them. Eventually they agreed David would take the Montana job, but they'd talk every day and he'd fly back once a month to see her. It's not ideal, David said as he walked her to her car, but we'll make it work. Promise me something, Lisa said. Promise me you'll think about what you really want. Not just the next job, but the life you want to build, because I need to know if there's room for me in that life. There is, David said, pulling her close. I promise there is. But as David drove to Montana a week later, he couldn't shake Lisa's words. What did he want? He'd spent his entire adult life chasing the next project, the next discovery, the next paycheck. But lately, he'd started wanting something different. Stability. Home. A life that included more than just work. The separation was harder than either of them had expected. Phone calls helped, but they weren't enough. David threw himself into his work, pulling long hours to make the time pass faster. Lisa stayed busy with her programs, but friends told her she seemed distracted, sad. Elena worried about both of them. She talked to Lisa almost daily and to David when he called to check on her. You two are miserable apart, she told David during one call. I know, David admitted, but what am I supposed to do? I have to work. Do you have to work everywhere except where you want to be? Elena asked pointedly. It was a fair question, one David didn't have a good answer for. When David flew back for his first visit in July, there was tension between him and Lisa that hadn't been there before. They were both trying hard to act normal, but the strain showed. The real test came at a family gathering Elena had organized. It was a birthday party for one of Lisa's cousins, and suddenly David found himself surrounded by Lisa's extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, children running everywhere. Most people were friendly, but David noticed some looks, heard some whispered conversations that stopped when he got close. Lisa's Uncle James was particularly cool toward him. James was a respected elder in the community and his opinion mattered. So you're the geologist, James said, looking David up and down. Elena tells us you've been spending a lot of time around here. Yes, sir, David said respectfully. I've been working on a project in the area. And now you're in Montana? Yes, sir. Temporary assignment, James nodded slowly. Seems like your work takes you many places. How does Lisa fit into that life? It was a direct challenge, and David knew it. I'm figuring that out, sir. Lisa's important to me. Very important. Important enough to stay? James pressed. Or just important enough to visit when your work brings you nearby? Lisa appeared at David's elbow, her expression tense. Uncle James, that's not fair. It's a fair question, James said, not backing down. I've seen too many of our young women get involved with outsiders who eventually leave. I don't want to see that happen to you. David's not like that, Lisa said. How do you know? You've known him, what, 6 months? Almost a year, Lisa corrected. Still, that's not very long. James looked at David again. No offense, young man, but you have to understand. We're protective of our own. I understand, sir, David said, though his jaw was tight, and I respect that. The conversation moved on, but David felt uncomfortable the rest of the evening. He could feel eyes on him, assessing him, judging whether he was good enough for Lisa. Later, when they were alone, Lisa apologized. Uncle James means well. He's just worried. He's right to be, David said. I am an outsider, and my job does take me away. Maybe this is too complicated. Don't say that, Lisa said quickly. Don't let one difficult conversation make you give up on us. I'm not giving up. I don't know how to make this work, Lisa. I don't know how to be what you need and also do my job." They sat in heavy silence, both struggling with doubts they hadn't voiced before. The rest of David's visit was strained. They tried to act normal, tried to recapture what they'd had before, but the doubts had been planted. When David left to go back to Montana, their goodbye felt different, uncertain. "I love you," David said at the airport. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, but I don't know if love is enough." "It has to be," David said. But even he heard the doubt in his own voice. Back in Montana, David was miserable. He'd told Lisa he loved her, she'd said it back. But instead of feeling happy, they both felt more confused than ever. Elena called him one evening, and David found himself pouring out his heart to her. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I love her, but my job is my job. I can't just quit. And Lisa's life is in Phoenix and with her community. How do we make that work?" "The same way every couple makes it work," Elena said. "You figure out what matters most and you build your life around that." "But what if I can't give her what she needs? What if James is right and I'm just going to hurt her?" "David, you're asking the wrong questions." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop asking if you can make it work and start asking if you want to make it work. Because if you really want it, you'll find a way." That night, David lay awake thinking about Elena's words. What did he really want in his heart? He wanted Lisa. He wanted a life with her. He wanted to wake up next to her every morning and come home to her every evening. He wanted to be part of her world, her family, her dreams. But wanting it and making it happen were two different things. The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and terrifying. He had to change. Not who he was, but how he worked. He had to find a way to use his skills in a way that didn't require constant travel, that allowed him to build roots instead of constantly pulling them up. It would mean sacrificing some opportunities, maybe making less money, possibly slowing his career advancement. But what good was career success if he was alone? David picked up the phone, his heart pounding, and called Lisa even though it was late. "Hello?" Her voice was groggy with sleep. "I want to make this work," David said without preamble. "Really work, not just survive. I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm going to find them, because losing you isn't an option." There was silence, then he heard Lisa crying softly. "I want that too," she whispered. "So much. Then we'll figure it out," David promised. Together. After they hung up, David stared at the ceiling of his Montana hotel room. He'd just made a commitment that would change his entire life. It was scary, but for the first time in months it also felt right. Now he just had to figure out how to actually do it. When David returned from Montana in September, he was a man with a plan. It wasn't a perfect plan, and there were still uncertainties, but it was a start. He'd spent the last month of his Montana assignment researching and making phone calls. He'd reached out to environmental consulting firms, talked to universities, explored options he'd never considered before. What he discovered was that his expertise could be valuable in ways that didn't require constant travel. The first person he told was Elena. He showed up at her house on a Saturday morning with coffee and breakfast burritos from the place in town she liked. "You're up to something," Elena said, eyeing him suspiciously as she took the coffee. "You have that look." "What look?" "The look of someone who's made a big decision and is either excited or terrified, maybe both." David laughed. She knew him too well. "I'm making some changes to my career. I wanted to talk to you about it before I tell Lisa." They sat on the porch and David explained his plan. He was transitioning away from pure exploration geology and moving toward environmental consultation and remediation. Several firms had expressed interest in hiring him. The work would involve assessing mining sites, helping with environmental impact reports, and consulting on sustainable resource extraction. "The pay won't be as good at first," David admitted, "and it's not as exciting as being out in the field discovering new deposits. But it means I can be based in one place, Phoenix specifically." Elena's face broke into a wide smile. "You're moving to Phoenix?" "If Lisa wants me there, yes. I've got 2 solid job offers already. Both are good companies with good reputations. I'd be doing work that actually matters, helping minimize environmental damage rather than just finding resources to extract." "What does Lisa think?" "I haven't told her yet. I wanted to make sure it was really possible first. I didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver." Elena reached over and patted his hand. "You're a good man, David. My daughter is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," David said honestly. That evening, David took Lisa to the same restaurant where they'd had that difficult conversation about Montana. He was nervous, his hands actually shaking a little as they sat down. "You're making me worried," Lisa said, noticing his tension. "What's going on?" David took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months. About what I want, about the life I want to build, about us." Lisa's face went pale. "David, if you're breaking up with me—" "No, God, no." "The opposite." He reached across the table and took her hands. "I'm moving to Phoenix. I've got job offers doing environmental consulting work. It's still geology, but different. Based in one place." "Your place?" Lisa stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You're what?" "I'm making a change so we can actually have a life together. No more 3-month separations. No more long-distance relationship. Just us in the same city, building something real." Tears started rolling down Lisa's cheeks. "You'd do that? Change your whole career for me? Not just for you, for us. And honestly, for me too." David squeezed her hands. "I've been chasing jobs all over the country for years, but I was never really building anything. Never putting down roots. I want roots, Lisa. With you." Lisa got up from her side of the table and moved to his side of the booth, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you so much," she whispered. "I love you too," David said, holding her tight. "So is that a yes? You want me in Phoenix?" Lisa pulled back and looked at him with shining eyes. "Yes, absolutely yes." The next few months were a whirlwind of changes. David finished his commitment in Montana and turned down several high-paying offers for travel positions. Instead, he accepted a job with an environmental consulting firm in Phoenix that specialized in working with Native American tribes on resource management and environmental protection. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd started his career helping companies find resources to extract, and now he'd be helping communities protect their land and resources. Lisa had changed his entire perspective on his work. David found an apartment in Phoenix near Lisa's place. Nothing fancy, but it was his first real home in years. Lisa helped him move in, bringing household items he'd never bothered to own before. Actual dishes instead of paper plates, towels that matched. Plants for the windowsill. "You're domesticating me," David joked as Lisa arranged throw pillows on his couch. "Someone has to," Lisa said with a grin. "You were living like a college student." "A successful college student," David protested. "I had a coffee maker that you used to heat up ramen. It was efficient." They both laughed, and David felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. This was what he'd been missing. Not just Lisa, but this feeling of building a life with someone, of having a home instead of just a place to sleep between jobs. But even with David in Phoenix, challenges remained. The biggest one came from Lisa's family. While Elena supported their relationship completely, and many family members had warmed to David, there were still those who were skeptical. Uncle James remained the most vocal. At a family gathering in November, almost a year after David and Lisa had first met, James pulled David aside for a conversation. "So you're staying in Phoenix," James said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. I've taken a job here. Made a commitment." "Commitment to the job or to my niece?" "Both," David said honestly. "Sir, I know you don't fully trust me yet, and I understand why. But I love Lisa. I'm not going anywhere." James studied him for a long moment. "You know what I worry about? That you'll try to change her. Make her less connected to her culture, her people, her roots. I've seen it happen before." "That's the last thing I'd want," David said. "Lisa's connection to her culture is part of who she is. It's one of the things I love about her. Why would I want to change that?" "Easy to say," James said. "Harder to live out when it gets inconvenient. When cultural obligations interfere with your plans. When you want to do things your way instead of our way." David felt frustration rising but kept his voice calm. "I'm not perfect and I'm still learning. But I'm trying. I show up, I listen. I participate. What else can I do to prove I respect Lisa's heritage?" James was quiet, then surprised David by saying, "Learn the language." "What?" "If you're serious about being part of this family, learn Apache. Not just a few words for show. Really learn it. That's how you prove you respect our culture. You put in the work." David nodded slowly. It was a fair challenge. "All right, I will. James looked surprised that David had agreed so readily. It's not easy. It's a complex language. I don't expect it to be easy, David said. But if it's important to Lisa and to you, then it's important to me. Something shifted in James's expression. Not quite approval, but maybe the beginning of respect. When David told Lisa about the conversation later, she was quiet. You don't have to learn Apache just because Uncle James challenged you, she finally said. I know, but he's right. If I'm going to be part of your world, I should put in the effort to really understand it, not just observe from the outside. David took her hand. Will you teach me? Lisa smiled, tears in her eyes. Yeah, I'll teach you. They started lessons that week. Lisa was patient but demanding, not letting David get away with sloppy pronunciation or half-memorized vocabulary. David discovered that James was right. It was incredibly difficult. The sounds were unlike anything in English, and the grammar structure was completely different from any language he'd studied before. But he persisted. He practiced while driving to work sites. He labeled everything in his apartment with Apache words. He listened to recordings Lisa made for him until he fell asleep. Slowly, he began to understand. Not just words, but concepts. The Apache language held worldviews and ways of thinking that couldn't be translated directly into English. Learning it was changing how he saw everything. 3 months after he'd started learning, David attended another family gathering. When someone spoke to him in Apache, he responded haltingly but clearly. The room went quiet. Then James, who'd been watching from across the room, nodded once. It was a small gesture, but David understood its significance. He'd passed the test, maybe not with flying colors, but he'd shown he was serious. He'd shown he was willing to do the hard work. After that, more family members began to warm to him. They invited him to ceremonies, included him in conversations, treated him less like an outsider and more like someone who was becoming part of the community. Elena watched it all with deep satisfaction. David had done what she'd hoped he would do, not just pursue Lisa, but embrace everything that came with her. He'd shown respect not just in words, but in action. One evening, as they sat on Elena's porch watching the sunset, she said to David, "You've come a long way from that day you helped me carry groceries." "So have you," David said with a smile. "You're not carrying them alone anymore." "No," Elena agreed, looking at him with affection. "Now I have family to help. Real family." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. He'd come to Arizona looking for copper deposits and mineral formations. Instead, he'd found something far more valuable. A home, a family, and a love that was changing his entire life. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. It was July again. Exactly 2 years since David's truck had broken down on that Arizona highway. The desert heat was just as brutal as it had been that day, but everything else had changed completely. David woke up early that morning, too nervous to sleep. Today was the day he'd been planning for months, and his stomach was doing flips. He got dressed carefully, choosing clothes that Lisa had helped him pick out weeks ago. Traditional but respectful, appropriate for what he was about to do. He drove to Elena's house, where he found her already awake and making coffee. She took one look at his face and smiled knowingly. "Today's the day," she said. It wasn't a question. "Today's the day," David confirmed. "Are you sure this is okay?" "Doing it here, I mean." "This is exactly where it should happen," Elena said firmly. "This is where your story began. It's where it should take its next step." Lisa was coming for dinner that evening. She thought it was just a regular Friday visit, nothing special. She had no idea what David had planned. David spent the day helping Elena prepare. They cooked together, cleaned the house, set up the porch with flowers and candles. Elena told stories about her own engagement to Thomas, how nervous he'd been, how he'd practiced his proposal speech for weeks and then forgotten every word when the moment came. He just blurted out, "Marry me," like he was asking me to pass the salt. Elena laughed. No poetry, no romance. But I said yes because I knew he meant it with his whole heart. "What if she says no?" David asked quietly. Elena looked at him with those wise eyes that seemed to see everything. "She won't." But David, even if she did, asking the question takes courage. That matters. By late afternoon, everything was ready. The sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. David's hands were shaking as he checked his pocket for the 10th time, making sure the ring was still there. He heard Lisa's car before he saw it, that familiar rumble of her engine. His heart started racing. Lisa came up the porch steps with her usual bright smile, carrying a bag of groceries. "Mom, I brought those peppers you wanted for—" She stopped, looking around at the flowers, the candles, the carefully set table. "What's all this?" "Dinner," Elena said simply. "A special dinner." Lisa looked at David, and he saw understanding start to dawn in her eyes. "David? Let's take a walk first," David said, offering his hand. "Before it gets dark." Lisa set down her groceries slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. She took his hand and they walked down the familiar path they'd walked dozens of times before. They walked in silence at first, and David tried to remember the speech he'd practiced. But just like Elena's story about Thomas, the words flew out of his head. They reached the rock formation David had first shown Lisa, the one with layers of ancient history pressed into stone. The setting sun made it glow like it was lit from within. "Do you remember the first time we walked here?" David asked. "Of course. You told me about geological time, and I told you my grandfather's stories about giants. You said both things could be true at the same time. Science and story. Facts and meaning." David turned to face her fully. "That's when I started to really see you. Not just how beautiful you are, but how you think, how you bridge worlds, how you hold space for different truths." "David, you're making me nervous," Lisa said with a shaky laugh. "Good, because I'm terrified." He took both her hands. "Lisa, 2 years ago I was a guy who lived in motel rooms and chased jobs all over the country. I didn't have a home, didn't really have family, didn't have roots anywhere. And then my truck broke down and I met your mother, and she introduced me to you and everything changed." Tears were already starting in Lisa's eyes. "You changed how I see the world, how I see my work, how I see myself. You challenged me and supported me and loved me even when I was figuring things out." David's voice cracked. "You gave me a home, not just a place, but a feeling. The feeling of belonging somewhere, to someone." "David," Lisa whispered, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to learn more Apache words until I can tell you I love you in all the ways your language allows. I want to help you build that cultural center you dream about. I want to sit on your mom's porch when we're old and tell stories to our grandchildren about how we met." David let go of one of her hands and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and opened it. Inside was a ring, not a traditional diamond, but a piece of turquoise set in silver, made by a local Apache artist that Elena had recommended. "Lisa, will you marry me?" Lisa was crying openly now, nodding before she could even speak. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, of course, yes." David slipped the ring on her finger with trembling hands, and then she was in his arms, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "I love you so much," Lisa said against his chest. "I love you too," David replied, "more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They held each other as the sun set, painting the desert in impossible colors. Eventually they walked back to Elena's house hand in hand, Lisa's ring catching the last light of the day. Elena was on the porch, and she stood when she saw them coming. One look at their faces told her everything. "Well?" she asked, though she already knew. "She said yes," David announced. Elena opened her arms and Lisa ran into them. "Oh, my girl," Elena said, holding her daughter tight. "I'm so happy for you." Then she pulled David into the embrace too, and the three of them stood there together. A family formed not by blood but by choice and love and kindness. Over dinner they talked about wedding plans. Lisa wanted something that honored both her Apache heritage and David's background. They talked about timing, about guests, about ceremonies and traditions. "We'll need to talk to Uncle James," Lisa said. "Make sure we do the traditional parts correctly." "He'll help," Elena said with confidence. "He approves of David now." "I can tell." "Really?" David asked, surprised. "Really? You won your place in this family by showing respect and putting in the work. That matters to people like James." Elena raised her glass. "To new beginnings and old traditions. To love that bridges worlds." They clinked glasses, and David felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought about that day 2 years ago when his truck had broken down. At the time it had seemed like terrible luck. But it had been the opposite. It had been the best luck of his life. If he hadn't broken down, he wouldn't have seen Elena struggling with her groceries. If he hadn't helped her, they wouldn't have become friends. If they hadn't become friends, he wouldn't have met Lisa. Every moment had led to this one. Later that night, after helping clean up, David and Lisa sat on the porch steps under a sky full of stars. Lisa kept looking at her ring, turning her hand to catch the light. "I can't believe this is really happening," she said softly. "Believe it," David said, pulling her close. "This is real. We're real. My mom knew, didn't she? From the beginning?" David laughed. "Oh yeah. She absolutely knew. She was matchmaking from day one. And you had no idea?" "None whatsoever. I thought she was just being motherly and kind." Lisa shook her head, smiling. "She told me once that the spirits put people in our path exactly when we need them. I didn't believe in that kind of thing before, but now..." She looked at David. "Maybe there's something to it." "Maybe," David agreed. "Or maybe your mom is just really good at seeing what people need and helping them find it." Inside the house, Elena sat in her favorite chair, looking at old photo albums. Pictures of her wedding to Thomas, of Lisa as a baby, of family gatherings and celebrations over the years. She found a blank page near the end and smiled. Soon there would be new photos to add. A wedding, maybe grandchildren someday, a family tree that continued to grow and branch in unexpected directions. She thought about Thomas and wished he could be here to see this. But somehow she felt like he knew, like he was smiling somewhere, approving of the man their daughter had chosen. Elena had told Lisa once that kindness comes back to you in unexpected ways. She'd been kind to David by accepting his help and opening her home to him. And look what had come from that small act of grace. A son-in-law, continued family, joy for her daughter. Sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest moments. A broken-down truck, a heavy bag of groceries, a willingness to help a stranger. From those small seeds, love had grown. The wedding took place the following spring, exactly 3 years after that first meeting. It was held outdoors on the reservation, with ceremonies that honored Lisa's Apache heritage and traditions from David's family as well. Uncle James performed part of the ceremony in Apache, his voice strong and proud as he blessed the union. David spoke his vows in both English and Apache, stumbling a little but getting through them with Lisa's encouraging smile. When he promised to honor her, her family, and her culture for all his days, there wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Elena sat in the front row, wearing traditional dress and a smile that could have lit up the desert night. She watched her daughter marry this good man who'd come into their lives on a day of broken trucks and heavy groceries, and she knew in her bones that she'd done right by both of them. As David and Lisa walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, David caught Elena's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Elena nodded, her heart full. After all, that's what mothers do. They see possibilities. They plant seeds. They nurture love.